Good morning.
Good morning. How are you guys?
Good. Should I try to share my slides now?
Sure, that would be great. Let me make sure I can make you a
Hold on.
presenter. I think I need to do something here. Oops.
I think it let me do it. Can
Oh,
you see it?
awesome. Yep, I sure can.
Let's see. Okay.
Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Oh, no problem. I'll try to make this interesting, but no, regulations are what they are.
That's right.
But there are some things that I think people maybe have missed, or maybe the implications of them, that kind of thing. How should, are we in private chat?
I think I mistakenly let two folks in, but uh, the the rest of the attendees will sit in the waiting room.
Yeah, I'm just hoping I was wondering how the chapter was doing. That's why I was.
Oh, well, actually, I have not. I stepped off the board last year. But I mean, making progress is what I understand. We just had a great conference, and we've just got such a great group of folks that are kind of leading the charge here in Iowa. So, um, they're just constantly just keeping everybody so informed, and Marcy and all those folks are just amazing.
That's great. We're seeing so much, because Warner Pacific is all over the country.
Hmm.
I'm just seeing so many great things from that the local and state chapters are really doing an outstanding job right now. That it's fairly consistently, unless it's a real tiny chapter and they just don't have the resources.
Yeah. Let's see. And Janet, I apologize. I should have introduced myself. My name is Michelle Henneman, and I'm actually running the tech behind the scenes.
Okay.
And so I am looking to see here who we're waiting for to hop on as facilitator today. Looks like it's Allison Baberl, so I'll be watching for her. Hi, Allison.
Hey,
How are you?
Hi,
good.
Allison.
Oh, hey, Janet, it's been a while.
I know.
How you been?
Super busy.
Well, I love that for you. Do you get to go out to California very often for Warner Pacific? Because they're headquartered out there, aren't they?
Yeah, they're right outside of Los Angeles in Westlake Village.
Yeah,
When I first started, I was out there a lot, and I haven't been as much in the last year because I'm able to, because of things I'm doing. Sometimes I'm at another location.
yeah,
Maybe I still live in the Washington area,
yeah. Or
so.
they just trust you now to work from home.
Oh yeah, I never did work out there. I was remote to start with, but there was initially there were a lot of meetings, so we could kind of figure out what we were going to leave the same, what we were going to change, and then my role has expanded quite a bit since first started. So, because I also oversee our large group segment in addition to the compliance and government affairs.
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, it's so great to hear from you. I was really excited when I saw that you were on here. I was talking to Alicia and last week at the NABIP Iowa convention, which is this is a follow-up too. And I was saying, "Oh, if you haven't had Janet Troutwine yet, she's amazing." And she goes, "Oh, we have her next week." I was like, "Oh, perfect. Then you're already ahead of it 'cause Janet is the best."
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. Olivia, do you need anything from me or Olivia, are you on this call? Or is it Michelle?
Oh,
Or
hey, it's Michelle. Hi.
oh, it's Michelle.
No,
Hey.
I don't think I need anything from you. Things are rolling. We'll be recording the session, so I'll just kind of linger in the background and I'll let folks in closer here in about 2 minutes. I'll start letting folks in and
Do we have to
um,
do polling questions?
we do. And I was going to mention that I already have uh, a couple of poll questions ready, and I usually will run those about 20 after the hour and about 40 minutes after the hour. So
So you'll just interrupt me, right?
they'll just pop up on the screen. You don't even have to say anything at all. Just kind of let them happen. We don't have to announce that they're there or anything like that. You can
Okay.
ignore them and you can actually just close the window if you want to.
Do
And
I
then
stop talking though?
no, you don't need to.
Okay.
Nope.
Okay.
And then yeah, I'll wrap it up and get it off everybody's screen. I'll give them a few minutes to answer the question, and then we'll just keep going.
Okay.
And
I
Michelle, we
always
stay on the same Zoom call for the full 2 hours, right?
We do, yes, and I will post in the chat for the CEC
Wait a minute. Are we
form.
2 hours?
Sorry, Janet, you're the first hour, and then we have a second one
Okay.
at
Sorry. I was going to say, uh-oh, I don't know if my content will stretch.
yeah, if you talk really slow, Janet.
Yeah, so I'll be posting things in the chat, such as, the CEC form and things like that. Um, we'll I don't know, Allison, if you wanted to, ask people to post their questions in the chat and then we can follow however you want to run that, Janet. If you'd rather have questions throughout or afterwards.
I'd rather do them at the end just to make sure I get through everything I said I was going to talk about,
Okay.
for C purposes.
And
And
Janet,
then
would you
if I,
prefer
but just to
me?
let you know that I'm not going to be looking at the chat.
Okay, I was
Somebody
gonna
need
say
feed me the questions, please,
that
because
was gonna be my question, if you wanted me to feed them to you or if you wanted to just read.
yeah, and if you have a burning question, you can interrupt me. If it's just so relevant to what I'm talking about right then, it's fine.
I wouldn't dream of it.
You can. Um, I'm not that. It's just that some of this is kind of. I tried to take out the overly technical stuff and just try to do this from the implication of what it meant for them and their clients.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well,
And I'll do all the intro stuff, Janet. So I'll pass it off to you when it's your time. And then if we end early and don't have questions to take us to the time, we can have a little bit of a break, and that's perfectly fine. And then we'll start the next speaker at the next top of the hour.
Okay.
So if you want to stay and get your own CEs, I mean, that's an opportunity for you.
Uh, I can't. I have another meeting afterwards.
No, it's tough being popular.
I've got so many a range of duties at Warner Pacific.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
I understand.
I oversee the large group segment, so I've got a meeting with a broker about a group that that they want that we're going to self fund the group. But anyway, I'll be quiet.
well, I'm going to go ahead and start letting folks in. We've got about 2 minutes. We've got about 14 in there in the waiting room right now. So I think we had like 40 some on Tuesday. So I would anticipate a lot joining at right at the top of the hour.
Yep. And I'll start right at the top of the hour and do a quick intro, and then Janet, you get the meat of the hour.
Okay, sounds perfect.
Yeah. It's just if you want, I was going to multitask. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I know some of you are still joining, but we're going to go ahead and get started so we can get into this really awesome session. Today's session is the next in our breakout in conjunction with the 2026 NABIP Iowa convention that we hosted in person last week. So I hope we got to see some of you in person last week. If not, it's great to virtually see you as well. A huge shout out and thank you to our sponsors for allowing us to put on a great conference and these virtual continuing education follow-ups. As a reminder, please keep yourself muted and your video off during the presentation. We will be posting a link in the chat that you will need to complete in order for you to receive your CE credits for this session. So keep an eye out for that link so that you get your credit. We will have 2 sessions this morning, and each have been approved for 1 continuing education credit. You will need to sign in separately for each session, so one for the 9 a.m. and one for the 10 a.m. We will be asking 2 polling questions during the program. You will see the first pop up about halfway through and the second near the end. If your organization's firewalls prevent you from using that pop-up, please send your name and NPN number to the NABIP Iowa chapter chat box. We will have time at the end for any questions. Feel free to post them in the chat box throughout the presentation, and we will try to get to as many as we can. So to get us started, I'm excited to introduce our first presenter, Janet Troutwine. Janet will be presenting From Legislation to Opportunity, what the latest federal changes mean for brokers. Janet Troutwine brings more than 40 years of experience in the health insurance and employee benefits industry. Since 2005, she served as CEO of the National Association of Benefit and Insurance Professionals, NABIP, also NAHU back then, where she led the organization's government and political affairs efforts. In 2023, she joined Warner Pacific as a compliance and legislation officer. Throughout her career, Janet has worked closely with members of Congress, senior federal officials, governors, and state legislators, earning a reputation for her deep understanding of legislative and regulatory policy from an insider's perspective. A trusted authority on compliance and regulatory matters, she provides valuable guidance and practical insight to help industry professionals navigate the complex policies shaping today's benefits landscape. Thank you, Janet, for joining us this morning and sharing your insights. I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here with you today. I'll tell you in advance, I'm going to talk a lot about regulation today. And regulations are boring sometimes. I'm going to try to make it not boring and kind of help you understand why certain things are going on and what it actually means. What about this regulation matters for you and your clients and the employees that work for them if they're group clients. So I'm just going to jump right in and get started. We're going to be talking about several different things that are pending and regulations. So just to kind of give you an idea of how we're going to be looking at this, this is intended to be an educational overview. We want you to understand what's going on, and we also, in addition to letting you know how this affects you, we are going to touch in several places on your responsibilities and boundaries that where lines should be drawn relative to some of these new things coming out. And I want to focus just a minute on regulation and tell you why regulations themselves matter more than new laws. And this changes from time to time, but right now we have a very closely divided Congress. So very few pieces of legislation can actually get through because the margins are so narrow that they tend to, Republicans and Democrats tend to block each other all of the time. And when we see that type of an environment, which has been frequent, the last few administrations, what we see is many more regulations, executive orders, trying to get things done because getting it through Congress, the president will be unsuccessful, whoever the president is, in doing that. So what we've seen with the Trump administration is much more regulatory activity and also many more executive orders than we've seen in the past. So when we look at what they can do through regulation, yes, the president can issue an executive order, but we also have things like changes can actually occur, official changes through official rules, regulations, proposed rules, final rules by federal agencies, even guidance that comes out, like an IRS piece of guidance, can have regulatory authority, and then the actual enforcement itself. So the most impact that you will see through the things I'm going to talk about is there may be some new disclosure requirements. There may be either reduced availability of products or new availability of products. There are some changes in eligibility rules, and then there are some things when we get in one of the regulations has some things that have to do with vendor oversight, and you might wonder why that matters, and I'll explain to you when we get to that. So all of this is, I'm going to try to put it in the context of why it matters. And then just finally, before I get going into the meat of this, some of you may be wondering, how does this all relate to the political climate? Because we're coming up on this fall in our midterm election. So we're 2 years into this administration. And then President Trump is term limited. And so what will happen when things change? Well, two things that you should watch for. And I'm telling you this first because it puts some of the other things in context. So two of the things that you should watch for are A, what happens in the midterm elections? Now, historically, regardless of who's in office, typically the first election that occurs 2 years after a president is elected, almost without failure, in the history of our country, whichever party the president is, the other party gains seats in the House, in the House of Representatives. So the first, if you wonder why there's been so much activity these first 2 years, it's because the president has the opportunity to push things through before the potential change. So, in other words, we're possible to have a change in the makeup of the House of Representatives because the margins are so narrow, it makes that even more likely. And then the Senate is the races are every 6 years. And so in the Senate, the changes happen less frequently, but it still will, there's no way that it could be anything except very close. And when it's really close, it's very hard for those regulation things to go through. But when they do have opportunities to not have to meet a supermajority on the Senate side, then they shove a lot of things into these big bills, like the one big beautiful bill that came out had a lot of things shoved into it. And so the way that things happen most in a narrowly divided Congress is through these um, big legislative measures that are through budget reconciliation. Or the other thing is at the end of the year on appropriations bills, that they have to pass. They become kind of a Christmas tree and everything in the world gets tacked onto it. So um, if you keep that in context about why we're having more regulations now, it's because of the lack of ability other than, those two big opportunities during the year to get little things through. It's just really difficult to do that. So everyone always wants to get their wish list into one of those two big things in a narrowly divided Congress like we have now. Okay, so let's keep going. All right, so a lot of what this means is that your role as a broker is expanding. Their employers are facing increasingly complex things to analyze. They have trouble interpreting them, and they need your help doing that. They want to make sure they understand if there are risks for them, and when you're trading off from one thing versus another. And then the regulatory complexity, if you think it's difficult for you, it's even more difficult for them. So they need some help with that in a kind of a plain English way. But you have to be careful in the course of doing that, and we'll get to that in a little while. Um, and what I mean by that is there needs to be a clear role in what your role is as the employer and their role as the broker and their role is as the employer. So kind of keep that theme in mind as we move through. So why a lot of these things matter for brokers and for your clients? Well, small and mid-sized employers are especially price sensitive. Most employees don't have much experience in comparing what their choices are that may come through their employer plan. And in terms of marketplace strategies, those are actually affected quite a bit by some of the regulations coming through, for those of you in the individual market, particularly. So I'm going to start off talking about something that sounds really exciting, the 2027 Notice of Payment and Parameters. This is actually a regulation that comes out every year, and it usually encompasses primarily modifications to the ACA. You rarely hear it talked about, and the reason you don't normally hear it talked about is that it usually has kind of innocuous kind of changes, no big things in it. Well, this year was different. A lot of the president's wish list ended up in the notice of payment parameters. And it's actually this year, it was 577 pages. And it really, more than we've seen in the past in this, we call it the NPP rule, more than the usual ones we see, it really affects a lot of policy direction of this administration. It includes a lot of shifts in the design of catastrophic plans, the way eligibility is verified. So a lot of these things we saw in the One Big Beautiful Bill, and this, and more on that in just a moment. A lot of things that have to do with state mandates and eligibility for premium tax credits. Those items would normally not show up in legislation like this. I apologize. We have so much pollen here, so bear with me. If this is finalized, and we expect that mostly it will be, it will reduce marketplace enrollment by up to 2 million people. So that will really affect the overall risk pool of the individual market, and we're hoping it doesn't cause more carriers to drop out of that individual market. So I want to make sure that we understand a couple of things that have occurred that are different than the what that they're not different, but they expand on the One Big Beautiful Bill. So there are some major changes to bronze and catastrophic maximum out-of-pocket standards. So HHS is proposing in this rule to allow bronze and catastrophic plans to exceed, not just catastrophic, but also bronze plans to exceed the statutory maximum out-of-pocket limit. And this, this has a lot of implications for consumers who are saying, well, the maximum it can be under the ACA is whatever it is that year. It puts consumers in the position of having a lot of additional financial exposure, and it puts you in the position of having to explain that and make sure that they understand that it's not like it was before. And states do have the right. This is what makes it interesting. They've introduced in a provision that kind of allows a state to override their action in this area and allow the state to decide whether those increases are necessary. And that's a very broadly defined. So this means that we might have many, many different rules for those of you that operate in more than one state across the country on what the maximum out of pocket is in the marketplace. So clearly we might have a lot of potential for lawsuits, and we'll see whether or not that would be challenged in court. And then what's really interesting is normally when a big bill is passed, like the One Big Beautiful Bill, it would have its own regulation. It wouldn't be a part of this. But because this notice of payment parameters comes out every year, they took many of the provisions of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and instead of including it in a regulation for that, just for that legislation, they dumped it into this one. And the reason why that is an interesting strategy is that this usually rule is finalized every year. Other regulations can go on for 2 and 3 years before they're finalized. This one is finalized every year. So so what this does, the things that they took out of the One Big Beautiful Bill have to do with marketplace eligibility and reduced federal spending. So they did officially in this rule eliminate eligibility for lawfully present immigrants who are not citizens. And that affects 1.5 million people who are enrolled currently. It permanently eliminates the low income special enrollment period for people under 150% of poverty. And future verification requirements will start in 2028, which will automatically end, automatic re-enrollment. So that's one of the reasons why we predicted earlier on the earlier slide that there were going to be significant declines in enrollment. Also, it's a requirement for all of the non-federal exchanges, as well as the federal exchange, to have some pretty big IT and operational overhauls. And what this might result in is more churn in the individual market, and more periods of without coverage as people seek other opportunities. What they also have interestingly done is they usually when executive orders are issued, some of them, every executive order that comes out doesn't fly. Some of them do and some of them don't. So what administrations do, all of them do this, is they issue a bunch of executive orders and they wait to see which ones are going to be challenged in court. So in the last administration or earlier, and there was one of the executive orders was challenged in court in City of Columbus versus Kennedy, and it was thrown out. And so this now they've put it back into this regulation as opposed to doing it in an executive order. And it's the 1 year failure to file and reconcile. So you're required if you get a premium tax credit to file a tax return. If you don't file a tax return and reconcile your premium tax credit, then theoretically you're not allowed to have the tax credit the next year. But they have not been enforcing that whatsoever. And now this actually puts it into a regulation that allows them to have more enforcement authority. Also, expanded income verification requirements. Again, in the past, sometimes income information would be asked for, but there wasn't a lot of follow-up. Even though it was said that there would be follow-up, it didn't really always occur. It usually didn't occur. And then regarding special enrollment periods, more verification of those special enrollments as opposed to, just taking someone's word for it. And then another thing that was included in this rule is, this is only in the marketplace, elimination of standardized policies. So this is because it only applies in things that are on healthcare.gov or the state exchanges as well. So all of those standardized plans that we've seen, those would be eliminated, and people have mixed views about those. Some people don't like the standardized plans, and some think that they offer a good place of comparison for consumers to be able to understand, to have something to compare to. And so what this signals from the administration of what they continue to do during their remaining time in office is a shift towards more flexibility, but possibly less guardrails for consumers that have less capability to make the comparisons, which means that your role is much more important because there are some of the tools that were there are not going to be there unless they're replaced with other tools to make comparison of policies simpler. So you're probably going to spend a lot more time explaining the difference between a deductible and a premium and eligibility and how long people have to submit their verification information. And your documentation of providing this education is extremely important. Just make sure that you note for your customers that you're doing this, because this is probably not the last we've seen of these regulations coming through. So the more you can document how important your role is, the better that will be. So overall, then, this particular piece of legislation, the implications of it represents a fundamental shift towards higher deductibles, lower premium coverage, stricter eligibility controls, and then there will be many more changes that will be arriving in 2028, and they'll probably be showing up in the next NPP. It does come out every year. Okay, now I'm going to shift to another regulation, and that is the CAA 2026. This is one of so the one I just talked about, the NPP rule, this is something that comes out every year. It just automatically comes out with any changes, updates. Usually the changes are minor, but they weren't this year. And then the CAA, what that means is Consolidated Appropriations Act. This is one where an Appropriations Act that was must-pass legislation had things tacked onto it. And so overall, I'm going to go get into more detail, but the overall effect of that is that they added regulation to to provide greater regulation for pharmacy benefit managers. And for those of you, I want to make sure everybody understands the role of pharmacy benefit managers because every single plan that you have has one in there. It's how your drugs are managed inside your health plans. With some plans, the pharmacy benefit manager is doing a lot of work in the background, and most of them work in a good faith basis, but there is a lot of lack of transparency in how they're getting paid, what their pricing is, what they do with pharmacy rebates, which is money that comes from the manufacturers on the majority of drugs that are prescribed, and fees that they receive, as well as how pharmacies are paid for filling prescriptions. There's an actual pharmacy, a cost that the pharmacist receives. And for larger plans, employers really need this information so they can. The idea of this is that some things are being done that have been trying to be passed in legislation for years, literally, and now they are gaining a much clearer insight into how much things cost as this goes into effect fully. Also, in the past, everything was Mother, may I, can you get me this information? And they're not allowed to restrict employer access to any of the drug data. And then rebates will be returned to the plan if the plan is self-funded, and I'll explain that more in just a minute. Now, I want to go through this a little bit in a little bit more depth. This is really critical. Excuse me for a minute. So there is a long-standing loophole in ERISA. ERISA, by the way, people think that ERISA only governs self-funded plans. That's not true. ERISA governs all group plans, and then on fully insured plans, you have additional state regulation. But it's not that one or the other. ERISA always oversees all group plans. So what this law does is it closes a long-standing PBM loophole that explicitly, by defining PBMs explicitly and TPAs as covered service providers. And the effect of that is that it makes them subject to all of the compensation disclosure rules right away. And so they're required to disclose every way that they get compensation. And there are a lot of different ways that they can. And if they don't do this, it triggers an ERISA prohibited transaction implication, which is bad for plan fiduciaries. It's bad for the employer if they don't do it. And the Department of Labor is also authorizing this legislation to further define exactly how far they'll take that, and they will. This will probably not be the only thing we see in this area. So let's talk a little bit about the transparency requirements and what that means. So this actually starts in 2028. So they've got to allow PBMs to get their systems ready. And this particular provision applies to large employers with 100 or more. If an employer is self-funded, they will receive all of this amount directly. If an employer is fully insured, they're still subject to receiving this amount, but they won't necessarily receive it to the same extent that a self-funded plan would. So they'll see everything that pharmacies are paid, exactly how much they pay for the drugs, their wholesale cost, and the average wholesale price, what the net price of the drug is after rebates are applied, how many claims were issued, what were the average days, number of the supply that people were getting. Was it 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? And then what the unit per dose is, out-of-pocket cost, total plan spend, and then affiliate pharmacy relationships. That's only part of what they have to do. So basically what this does is it transforms this data access, which has been just a black hole in some situations, from being on request to a mandatory standardized reporting regime. And so it allows more competitive benchmarking and it allows lower costs for employers. So this was actually really good. Because even if it's on a fully insured plan, it still is effective and is going to be effective with lowering costs. And then the other thing that's really, really important is pass-through of rebates. So almost, as I've mentioned earlier, almost every drug issued, there's a rebate associated with it unless it's a very low-cost generic. Even some generics have rebates. And rebates are uh, from manufacturers, and they issue them to pharmacy benefit managers in an attempt to try to get on their formularies. And it does definitely reduce the cost of drugs. Rebates are not small. Rebates are very, very large amounts. So in this situation, if you can think of that for a large employer, and when I say large, I don't mean giant, I mean even like 100 employees, the amount of the rebates can be significant. So to be able to receive all of those rebates back to the employer plan is a very important thing. So they're required to remit the rebates back starting in 2028 quarterly, and then and also undergo annual audits. And the audits are chosen by the plan fiduciary and are not paid by the PBM. And then anything that's been overpaid or they have to will be identified in the audit if the PBM has been overpaid. So this eliminates things like you've probably heard about spread pricing, which is just kind of a way. Originally, it was designed to lower costs for employers, but there's zero transparency in it. So it just basically says that this is an employer-sponsored plan. The employers in the plan should get those rebates back for the benefit of their employees to either make lower their plan costs or to provide additional benefits for them. So employers are really paying attention to this because there have been a number of lawsuits, I don't know if you've heard of them in the last few years, related to how much employers spend on pharmacy. It's under a lot of scrutiny. It's really under the magnifying glass. So the result of this is that employers will be expected to review these disclosures. That means that you're going to be reviewing them too, right? And understanding how this revenue is flowing and demonstrate that they are exercising their duty as a fiduciary under ERISA for oversight of their plan. Because the people that have gotten sued over this are not the PBMs, it's the employers. So the employers are the fiduciaries. They're required to be responsible for the plans. So this is a really big improvement. So what do the employers have to do? They have to review the PBM reports regularly. They have to, verify that the PBMs are in compliance. It'll just be a checklist type of thing. That doesn't not as bad as it sounds. And plans will be required to send an annual notice on reporting obligations, and you can to employees, and you can add it to the existing documents. It will be a standardized thing. So who's impacted the most? Employers with 100 or more employees. Fully insured plans can opt in for the detailed data. So why does it matter for you? Well, brokers help employers, understand all of these things on all of the products you understand the products, what they have to do to comply, identify questions. It's really important to avoid interpreting this data that you're seeing as financial advice or as yourself acting as the plan fiduciary. So the boundaries are important. Brokers provide the education and context, but employers retain decision-making authority and fiduciary responsibility. So these should be clear boundaries and make sure they're clear to you and to your clients. That's very, very important because these new kind of gifts that we're receiving in this legislation can, come at a cost if you overstep your role. Okay, now I'm going to switch gears. Another regulation. So I don't know how many of you remember. I do remember because I've been around for a long time, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. So the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act was kind of the first piece of privacy legislation that affected brokers. And it's a federal law. It requires financial institutions, um, and that's defined broadly, to protect confidentiality of consumers' non-public personal information. It applies really broadly to organizations that offer financial products. So it applies to banks, it applies to insurers, and it applies to you as a broker and certain benefit administrators. So the goal of the whole legislation, this came out before HIPAA, is to ensure transparency. So you might have be so absorbed with HIPAA that you forgot about GLBA because some of the duties overlap. But there are a few things that are different, so I want to make sure that you understand those. So this is the first time in a long time that Congress is looking at a draft to modernize the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. The overall direction of what they are proposing is good, but the move towards a uniform national privacy standard is good, but there are a few things in there that allow state opt-outs that could really cause some disruption. There's some legal ambiguities, and we want to make sure that we don't disrupt the marketplace by doing this. So there will be a lot of comments that are submitted on this. Overall, how does it apply to you? Well, this legislation, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, has to do with personal consumer information. So when we think of that, we're not just talking about their health information. We're talking about things like social security numbers, dates of birth, health or medical underwriting data, also even things like, financial account information, even phone numbers. Those are things that you're required to keep private and not share them. So what's going on with this relative to this? Well, the House Financial Services Committee is advancing a draft that would, and this is in Congress, to update GLBA's privacy provisions to what they say is modern data practices. So it does strengthen consumers' rights in terms of opt-outs and deletions, and it proposes the federal preemption of state privacy laws. And hopefully, if it's finalized correctly, it could function to much more to kind of eliminate some of these state differences in privacy laws, which can be really confusing. So, in general, our overall industry has agreed broadly with what their intent is, but we want to make sure that there is support for modernizing the GLBA rather than replacing it with a brand new regime or allowing states to opt out. So why this matters for you? Well, federal preemption is really critical to avoiding, because I know many of you operate in more than one state, having state by state privacy compliance where you can't really streamline your own operations in terms of what you do, unless you take, I guess you can always take the highest requirement. But the prospective opt-out and deletion exceptions protect your core underwriting activities, as well as things like renewals, compliance audits, analytics, risk management. So we want to make sure that the things are technology neutrals to allow innovation moving forward, including this responsible use of AI, but without being a force to disclose competitively sensitive methods. So we want to make sure that this is well designed. We're going to be making, a NABIP is involved in this as well, and making sure that GLBA is updated, but in a sensible way, not to jeopardize the streamlining that we already have. Okay, switching gears again. Now you might say the No Surprises Act, I thought that already passed. Well, it did. And let's talk about that for a minute and how that's gone. So why did we have, let's do some level setting. Why did we have the No Surprises Act to start with? Well, we had surprise bills. Employees used in-network facilities, but and unknowingly received out-of-network care. So they go into an emergency room and they find out later that the emergency physician was not themselves, even though the hospital was in network, the physician wasn't, or radiology wasn't, or anesthesia wasn't, and there was balance billing that was resulted. And so what the law changed is uh, it allowed patients to be held harmless for most surprise bills, and shifted payments to um, insurers and providers. And arbitration was designed to be a backstop. So there are some limited choice. It has to do with emergency care, specific services at in-network facilities, air ambulance settings, things where patients typically can't choose who treats them. So it offered some predictable costs for covered situations. This is what it's designed to do. So balance billing prohibited. So these out-of-network providers had to pretty much accept what the in-network rate was and so forth. And then disputes were handled without the employee getting involved. So this is the key. This is the sticking point. Insurers and providers would negotiate payment directly. It was the idea is that they would use some sort of arbitration, and then if needed, either could use an independent dispute resolution, which is more expensive, but the idea was to reduce stress and complaints, and also costs, because surprise billing didn't just result in higher costs for the employee, it also resulted in higher costs for the health plan, whether it was a fully insured plan or a self-funded plan. So here's how it was supposed to work. The step one was there was a 30-day negotiation period after the claim was processed, and the insurer and the out-of-network provider would have 30 days to try to informally agree on what a payment would be. And then if no deal was reached, the next step would be that they could indicate what they call baseball arbitration, which is independent dispute resolution. And under that case, they both submit one offer and the arbitrator would pick one. Well, arbitrators were supposed to weigh the median end network rate, plus the complexity and the context of the market to try to keep the outcomes near end network levels. That's where the cost savings comes in to both the consumer and to the plans, and to limit the use of independent dispute resolutions. So initially, the idea was that there would be probably about 17,000 a year in costs for the. It says 17,000 a year disputes filed. Instead, there are 3.3 million. So this has added billions in added costs to plans, to consumers, and they have not done, there are many more things going to independent dispute resolution than should be going there. Most things should be able to have been fixed in that step one. So Congress is just up in arms about this. They went to a lot of trouble to pass the Surprise Billing Act. And they're really centered on this independent dispute resolution process, why the volume is so high, why the provider favorable outcomes are so high, and the rising administrative costs, and that this whole thing is just drifting away from the intent of the legislation. So what they're looking at is tightening the eligibility to actually go to arbitration, to discourage bulk or serial filings. And what is that? That just means that some of the I want to say this delicately. Some of the practices, like emergency room doctors, for example, are owned by private equity, which would actually do bulk or serial filings for a lot of different cases all at the same time, and which actually bulked up the system and it added to that, and it was a part of that 3.3 million. And just to really put strong discouragements and even penalties for doing that, to increase transparency in how the decisions are made, and to really anchor the awards more clearly to those in-network rates. So the implication for your clients is nothing is passed yet. This is a big item of discussion right now, and I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. But we're likely to see some incremental regulatory changes. The administration is concerned about it as well. So this is something we'll keep you informed of. But this is just something you should be aware of, that surprise billing, that act that was supposed to be so wonderful and it should have been, has had some hiccups. So the key takeaways are strong consumer protections, but the dynamics of the arbitration can actually increase costs rather than decreasing them. So I would say that we need to really stay engaged when disputes are going on. And remember, the cost of the disputes is borne by the plan. So that's what drives that cost. It can actually increase the cost of the coverage for people. Okay, that was the end of my prepared presentation. And if we have any questions, I can answer them.
Hey, Janet, it doesn't look like we have any yet. You must have just wowed everybody into silence. As a reminder, you can definitely drop your questions in the chat. If you have any you would like Janet to answer, I'll give everyone a couple minutes to type and spell check. We appreciate you taking the time to do this, Janet. You made a maybe sometimes boring topic very interesting. Oh, we don't have a question, but Marcy just wrote in to say you are such a great wealth of knowledge. And Alicia echoed that saying you're great and thank you. So again, you must have just wowed everybody into silence.
Well, I will say before we get off, I would encourage you to kind of pay attention to what's going on. Make sure you watch the updates that come from NABIP, as well as things that you get from the Iowa chapter about things that are going on. I didn't go into anything at the state level. I was talking only about federal things today. And also, I would really, really encourage you to think about, how all this stuff happens, because it really matters what happens in elections, and it can kind of help you. I'm not being political at all here. I'm just observing this. I've watched it for so many years. When these midterm elections come up, a lot of people think that they're less important than the presidential elections, and that's really not true. So you can kind of anticipate, how things will go based on how these elections turn out. And the elections actually, you can anticipate also based on the elections. If the elections are unfavorable to the administration, and a lot of that happens to every administration, it's not necessarily a signal of anything, to be honest, then you can know that we're going to have many more regulations coming. This is only the beginning. I expect to have many, many more regulations, and really need to watch for them and make sure that you understand them. But please provide education and help your employer decide what they want to do about things, but don't decide it for them, because you've got to really keep that line very bright about your role and their role as a plan fiduciary, which is not what your role is. Your role is to provide advice to them. You are their advisor. You're not their decider. And it's very hard. I know some of your employers depend on you and you think maybe you are kind of running their show, but just make sure that you empower them with your knowledge and advice so that they can make the decisions. This is a really important distinction. So I do want to say that.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. And Janet, there's still no questions, just a lot of glowing reviews for you. So I think we'll end it there. Thank you again, Janet.
Yeah,
We'll
thank you
take
for
a
having me. So nice to
yeah,
talk with you.
it was so nice to hear from you. We will take a short break for everyone who is in attendance. We will be back here at the top of the hour for those of you in Central Time. That is 10 a.m. And we will get ready with our next speaker. So enjoy your short break.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janet.
Hello, John.
Hello, how's it going?
Hi, this is good. This is Michelle. I'm facilitating the tech in the background. Did you have a presentation that you wanted to share?
I do. I can try sharing that right now.
Perfect. We can see it. Great.
Awesome.
So I'll be displaying a couple of questions throughout your presentation just for the requirement with the insurance division. You can just kind of talk right through those. You don't need to announce them or pause in any way. And I'll take them off the screen after a couple of minutes. Um, and I think Allison will kind of kick off the hour with some announcements and then we'll turn it over.
Awesome. That sounds great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, John, we'll leave questions to the end. We do have the chat box open. Would you prefer to read your questions or would you like me to read them to you?
Uh, yeah, if I notice them, I'll read them. But if I'm going through it and I don't see one, feel free to stop me and shout it out.
Okay. All right, we will get started here in just a moment.
Sounds good.
All right, everyone. I hope you've made it back to your computers after that short break and are ready for another fun hour of continuing education. A quick reminder before we get started with our second speaker. Please complete the continuing education form, the CE form, in the chat to ensure you get your credits. You will see that dropped from our lovely Michelle here shortly. And just like the first hour, you will see two polling questions pop up during the program. If you cannot access them or your organization's firewalls prevent you from completing the form, please send your name and NPN in the chat box to the NABIP Iowa chapter, and we'll make sure that we get that figured out for you. Okay, well, we won't delay. I know we have a lot of great content to get to yet again. Our second speaker today is John Moore. John will be presenting the PBM landscape in 2026. John currently serves as Director of Strategic Partnerships at MedOne Pharmacy Benefit Solutions. John is based in Dubuque, Iowa, and has been with MedOne for 8 years, spanning 3 different roles. His experience at MedOne has allowed him to acquire a comprehensive understanding of the pharmacy benefit space, which he uses to help educate and collaborate with broker partners, clients, and members. Thank you, John, for sharing your insights with us this morning. We appreciate everyone taking the time to join us. And just as a reminder, we will have that form for you to complete for your continuing education credits dropping here shortly. I'll pass it off to you, John.
All right. Thanks, Allison. And thanks, everybody, for having me again. My name is John Moore with MedOne Pharmacy Benefit Solutions. I'm based in Dubuque, Iowa, where MedOne is headquartered, and really excited to be talking about pharmacy benefits here this morning. And there's a lot going on in our space, and that's really my goal, is just to help shine some light on some of the things that we're seeing at MedOne and in the pharmacy benefits industry, and just some things to consider as a broker and as a client offering their employees and dependents a health plan and a pharmacy benefit. So that's really my goal here today, is just let you know what's going on in 2026. What are some things that you can consider, some options, some programs, things like that, because I think we all know that you don't have to look very far to see, PBM in the news, rising prescription drug costs, and want to share a little bit of insight on what we're seeing and what ultimately our broker partners and our clients and members can do about it. So with that, I'll jump right in. What we'll cover here today, I did want to hit on some PBM legislation items, just because there's particularly this year, at both a federal and state level, there's been a lot going on the legislation front, targeting PBMs. So we'll get into that a little bit, and then I do want to talk about some of the opportunities that we see on biosimilars, specialty medications. GLP-1s is obviously always a hot topic over the past few years, so we'll talk about that. There's this kind of growing opportunity for direct to consumer, where drug manufacturers are coming out with marketing directly to patients. And so we feel at Med1 there's an opportunity there to kind of harness that and incorporate that into the pharmacy benefit plan. So we'll talk a little bit about what we've seen in the past on that and what we feel that like the opportunity is today, and then we'll have some takeaways as well and some Q&A. But again, if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat or shout it out, and we can kind of address them as they pop up. Real quick background on Med1. This is I want this presentation to be more PBM landscape, informational, educational. But just so you know who you're talking to, Med1 is a pharmacy benefit manager based in Dubuque, Iowa. Founded out of a retail drugstore chain called Hardig Drug, which has been in business since 1904. It's the oldest continuously family-owned pharmacy chain in the United States. Med1 was founded in 1999 by a frustrated pharmacist offering a health plan to his own employees and their dependents at the time, and just ran into a lot of frustration with the lack of transparency, the pricing model of the bigger PBM that he was working with at the time, and then just lack of flexibility in terms of no ability to customize his benefit plan or set it up in a way that made sense for a pharmacist with a chain pharmacy. As you can imagine, he had some thoughts on how his network should be set up to prioritize his own pharmacy locations, and he just didn't have any of that flexibility. So he ultimately in 99 set out on a path to first self-administer his own pharmacy benefit for Hardig Drug, and that was really client number one for Med1. But really, that was the genesis of Med1 and kind of how Med1 got it started. And so here we are, 26-ish years later, operating on that same kind of pass-through, transparent model that we got started on way back in 1999. So that's been kind of a fun evolution to see, and we feel like there's some real tailwinds, which I'll talk about a little bit on the legislative front around the market in general really seeking out more transparency, more answers to their questions, more accountability from the PBMs now more so than ever. And so we feel really good about the fact that that's kind of been our model since the start, and we really feel like the market is kind of moving that way. So it's been exciting to see. All right, jumping into kind of the pharmacy benefit landscape a little bit here. So this problem slide in terms of kind of what the primary issues are, from our perspective as a pass-through PBM. This could have been used, over the past probably 10 years, because it's these three kind of problems have kind of persisted and really become more and more prevalent in the past, I would say 3 to 5 years. But really they've been around for quite a while with a couple of them. So it really all boils down to, 3 key drivers of what we feel is really overutilization and ultimately high pharmacy spend, which is what clients and their members are that's their main concern is cost going up. And so the first problem we see is just the increasing percent of spend on the pharmacy benefit and patients with multiple chronic conditions. So there's statistics out there that say 6 in 10 American adults now live with a chronic condition where they're on a medication that they're taking every month. It's not a one and done thing. So there's more people that are suffering from chronic conditions, and they're on medications and they're staying on them longer. So that's one driver of overutilization, not overutilization, but really increased pharmacy spend because you have patients taking medications and they're on them for longer. Number 2 is probably top of mind for most, I would say, in our industry is just new, more expensive drugs coming to market. And now more than ever, particularly on specialty medications. There's a statistic out there on specialty medications that say on any given self-funded health plan, on average, specialty drugs account for around 50% of the total prescription benefit spend. So, you have 1 to 2% of the population on a specialty drug, but driving, roughly half of the spend on the benefit on any given health plan. So, and then off-label use, we have obviously seen that with GLP-1s and kind of the boom that's happened over the past few years there. So we'll talk about that a little bit. The third real driver is, more is, the traditional way that PBM has been done since really the inception of PBMs is really on that kind of traditional spread-based pricing model, where the PBM is invoicing the health plan one amount and reimbursing the pharmacy a separate lower amount, and PBM makes their money off of essentially that cut in the middle. That spread is what it's come to be known as. And really, it's, we feel that's a misaligned incentive, because if the PBM is making, money off the cost of the medications, by nature of that model, they're incentivized to fill more medications and incentivized to fill higher dollar medications, because it allows, for more opportunity to, make money off of that spread differential. So, that's kind of boils down to the problems as we see it, and we'll get into some possible solutions for these problems in a bit here. But before we get there, I just wanted to call out some of the headlines that we're seeing in the pharmacy benefit space today. Again, like I said earlier, you don't have to look very far. A quick Google search on PBMs, you'll likely be hit with a lot of these topics that you see here on the screen. But now more than ever, PBM reform is taking place across the country with legislation. You have new kind of disruptors coming to market, namely on this slide, Mark Cuban, Cost Plus Drugs, who's kind of set up his Cost Plus mail order pharmacy, where it's really in an effort to bring price transparency to the market, where he's, Mark Cuban's posting the cost that it takes him to acquire the medication, and then roughly a 15% markup from there to ship it and keep the lights on and things like that. So that's been kind of eye-opening, I think, for a lot of people to see those prices listed out there like that. And he's really, I think, making a push on specialty generic medications, really coming in with some cost-effective options for specialty generics, namely Stargemza, which we'll talk about on the biosimilar slide. So a lot going on there. You could throw Trump RX into the kind of disruptor mix with what they're trying to do with with their direct-to-consumer programs. Again, I think that's kind of the hot topic of 2026 is these direct-to-consumer. We've seen it pop up a lot on the GLP-1 products, where they're kind of going around the insurance, and they're getting members, offering a cash price for anywhere from $150 to $400 for these GLP-1 medications. And that's and so plans are wondering what can we do on that direct to consumer front, how can we access those prices. And then we have the GLP-1 pill that's been a kind of hot topic this year. We feel like it's going to drive increased demand for GLP-1s for sure. There's previously on GLP-1s it was an injection that can be a barrier for some people who don't want to deal with needles, which I totally understand. So with the pill, a more kind of convenient pill form is we feel like there's likely going to be an increased demand as a result of that. But we just feel in general with this slide, there's just a lot of different kind of forces coming together at one time that are really putting PBMs in the national spotlight, which we feel is ultimately a good thing, because when you have more eyes on you, there's more scrutiny and more push for things to be done a better way. So it's all good things in our opinion. Okay, jumping into some of the agenda items here, I did want to talk a little bit about legislation because there is a lot going on the legislation front. I'm not a lawyer. I won't bore you with the nitty gritty details, but I did want to hit on a few things. First, from a federal standpoint, many of you may have seen, in February of this year, there was some PBM legislation that was passed in addition to a broader kind of spending bill, but it was kind of lumped into this Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2026. Many are calling it the most significant federal PBM reform ever, certainly in decades. And it's really centered around effectively requiring PBMs to transition to a more pass-through model. So we talked a little bit about that spread pricing model where the PBM kind of sits in the middle, invoices the client, reimburses the pharmacy. And those are two separate amounts as part of that equation, where this Consolidated Appropriations Act legislation is really pushing for PBMs to essentially, it's kind of listed on the second bullet point there, delinking the PBM compensation from the price of the drug. So instead charging a flat fee for the PBM services, and not allowing PBMs to have their revenue be driven off the cost of the medication. So that's really what that kind of spread pricing model. So right now, the legislation as it sits today, this delinking, kind of getting rid of the spread pricing model, only applies to Medicare Part D. And again, the timeline for this is they're giving PBMs, a couple of years, 2028, 2029 timeline to kind of refigure their financial model. But we feel, even though it's only applicable to Medicare Part D right now, typically when these things are applied to CMS, there's then pressure to on the self-funded kind of commercial market to follow suit. So we think there could be some changes coming on the commercial market as well as a result of this. But so the delinking of the compensation from the price of the drug is one component. The second component that you may have seen headlines about is the 100% rebate pass through, where typically a revenue driver for PBMs in the past has been retaining a percentage of the rebate that's driven by the client's brand or specialty drug use. This legislation requires that 100% of the rebate must be passed through. So those are kind of the two big items with this Consolidated Appropriations Act legislation. There's some other things in here about mandatory transparency reporting, enhanced audit rights for plan sponsors, penalties to the PBMs for noncompliance. So, in MedOne's eyes, and probably in the eyes of other pass-through PBMs like MedOne, it doesn't really impact our model and how we do things, but we feel ultimately it's good for the industry that more spotlight has been shined on some of these pricing practices, and the interesting thing will be ultimately is how the PBMs that are operating on these spread pricing models, rebate retention, is how they will respond to this and ultimately adjust their model to kind of be compliant with this legislation. So this is more of a TBD item, because again, the timeline is until end of 2028, early 2029 for when this goes into effect. But it's certainly something worth keeping an eye out as we move toward those dates. On a state level, there's also a lot going on. It says here, as of early 2026, all 50 states have enacted at least one law or regulation targeting PBMs. And you can see we've listed a few here, Colorado, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Florida, Vermont. All of these are really kind of geared towards some of those same items around, delinking the PBM compensation, kind of banning spread pricing, 100% pass through of rebate. So again, it's not only happening at the federal level, it's happening at the state level as well. And, we experienced this firsthand last year in Iowa, where, Senate File 383 was signed into law in June of 2025 with the goal of increased transparency, pricing fairness, member access, all good things that are trying to be solved. We understand that there's some, excuse me, brokers and clients that it's currently under an injunction with a number of clients, and for good reason in their eyes. But ultimately, we feel that bringing transparency and pricing fairness to this industry is a good thing. It's just a matter of how it's done. So you can see here again, the transparent pricing, the rebate pass through is a requirement. No spread markup, fair pharmacy reimbursement. So they're actually switching, some of the bigger chains to be reimbursed, or sorry, non-chains to be reimbursed at the NADAC, which is kind of an independent third-party pricing source, plus a $10.68 dispense fee, which can be a change, gone are the days with this legislation of the $3 or $4 generics, because when there's a $10.68, dispensing fee at the pharmacy, those $4 generics are now, $14.68. So there is some change on that, but ultimately it's about reimbursing the pharmacies a fair amount, because for a long time with this spread pricing model, the PBMs are invoicing the client and then they're reimbursing the pharmacy as little as possible because it increases that spread differential in the middle. So this is really the fair pharmacy reimbursement is its intent is to be aimed at giving the pharmacies a fair cut of the reimbursement. Expanded pharmacy access, any willing pharmacy, PBMs cannot impose penalties or incentives that limit a member or patient's choice of pharmacy. And then lastly, the cost sharing accountability, requiring that all cost sharing payments, copay cards must be applied towards the member's deductible and out-of-pocket max, with the exception of the high deductible. So, many of you probably experienced this firsthand last year when we were kind of going through this. It was interesting. The law was signed in June of 2025 with an effective date of July 1st of 2025. So it was a pretty quick turnaround for PBMs to get in compliance from when the law was passed. But certainly, Iowa is not alone when it comes to targeting PBM pricing practices and pushing for more transparency. So I think this will be something that we keep an eye on going forward, not only in Iowa but across the country in terms of this price transparency. Okay, so the first question is posted there. I will continue on to biosimilars, and biosimilars is one of the most, I would say, exciting opportunities, particularly for self-funded employers who have some say in the matter of who they're using for their PBM and kind of what gets covered on their health plan. Ultimately, one of the I would say best opportunities for mitigating costs, particularly on some of these high-cost legacy specialty medications that are very common in the utilization file across plans. Ultimately, the advent of biosimilars happened back in 2009. There was some legislation passed that pushed for greater access to safe and effective biological products. The Biosimilar Act happened in 2010 as part of the Patent Protection and Affordable Care Act. Really the first biosimilar, and just to give you an idea of what a biosimilar is for those if you don't know, it's really a generic-like product. It's not technically called a generic. It's has the biosimilar nomenclature, but the generic-like product that's really kind of come in and made a boom in the market over the past probably 2 or 3 years, particularly with the first blockbuster specialty medications like Humira, like Stelara, that have gone off patent officially in 2023 and 2025. So it's these generic products that come at most of the time a much cheaper price point than the reference brand specialty product in this case. So the first one actually came to market in 2016 in Zarxio. What's interesting here is in September of 2016, you can see Amjevita was the first Humira biosimilar approved by the FDA, which is interesting because the Humira is the number one prescribed specialty medication in our country for a number of years in the late teens, early 2020s. Over the past 10 years or so, $20 billion in revenue in the United States alone for Humira as a product. And the biosimilar, the first one, was approved by the FDA in 2016. So it's curious that we didn't hear about it more back in 2016. And then you read that second line there that says, there was essentially a settlement agreement between AbbVie, who's the manufacturer of Humira, and Amgen, who is the manufacturer of that first biosimilar, where effectively AbbVie paid Amgen to essentially keep their product on the shelf until 2023, which is really kind of a crazy concept when you think about it, that this drug manufacturer is making so much money that they can pay their competition to essentially keep their product on the shelf and remain kind of the exclusive provider of the product in this kind of category for another roughly 7 years. So it's really to the detriment of consumers, health plans, payers, who instead of getting that biosimilar that kind of reduces that cost back in 2016, we really didn't see that price decline on these biosimilars until 2023 when that settlement ended, and really the first biosimilars flooded the market in 2023 for Humira. So that's a little bit of background on biosimilars. You might be asking, okay, we know what a biosimilar is. Why does it matter for health plans, particularly self-funded plan sponsors? This is really this slide shows the math behind why biosimilars are such an exciting opportunity for these health plans. You can see here that the difference, we're showing Stelara here versus the biosimilar Stargemza. Stelara treats a lot of these, immunocompromised conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, things like that. But so here's the net cost comparison of these products. One box of Stelara having a list price of almost $35,000. This is taken again, usually every 2 months. So you get a pharmacy discount of 21%. That gets you down to a subtotal cost of $27,000. And usually there is a very large rebate tied to Stelara, especially these days with the biosimilars on the market. They want to retain as much of that market share as they can. So in some instances, we've seen up to a $20,000 rebate for one fill of Stelara, which gets us down to a net price of $7,600. Again, Stelara went off patent last year in May. April, I believe, was actually the month that it went off patent. Stargemza, now today in 2026, Med1 has identified as the lowest net cost biosimilar. Again, similar one box, 190 milligram dose. Instead of this $35,000 list price, it has an acquisition cost of $300 plus the dispensing fee, gets us to a subtotal and net price of $410 for essentially the same biosimilar product as Stelara. So this you can see when you compare the net price, it becomes an obvious choice of what's the better financial decision for clients ultimately. And Med1 is and other transparent pass-through PBMs are really pushing utilization of these biosimilar products. But I would encourage everyone to understand your own PBM's philosophy on biosimilars, because it's a really good measuring stick of ultimately the financial model of the PBM. Med1 again is and other transparent PBMs most likely are not making money off the cost of the medication, and so we can really be aligned with the employer and say, yes, this Stargemza is the true lowest net cost product, and we don't care if we're not making a spread differential. So there's no skin in the game for us if you're filling the highest cost product like Stelara or the lowest net cost product like Stargemza. So why not go the Stargemza route and really go after that lowest net cost? Not every PBM takes that stance though. Some PBMs are, will have the Stelara still on the formulary, co-preferred with a biosimilar. So it's all that to say is it's important to understand your PBM's philosophy around biosimilars, because if there's not an intentional kind of proactive approach to getting utilization to the biosimilar, if it's just co-preferred, for example, that's not enough of an incentive for members to move. They're just going to keep on filling the higher price option. And so, we take a more proactive approach to removing Stelara from the formulary, for example, and really doing a high touch member campaign around outreach to the members and prescribers to ensure they're kind of in the loop, their questions are answered, they're taken care of in this transition to the lower net cost products. Okay, I saw some activity in the chat. I don't know if any of those are for me. Okay, doesn't look like it. All right, so moving on. Oh, and last slide on biosimilars, I'll just say, the two blockbuster drugs have come or gone off patent, Humira and Stelara, over the past 2 or 3 years here. But this biosimilar landscape is really just getting started. You can see, you probably recognize a lot of the names on this slide of drugs that are coming down the pipeline over the next probably 3 or 4 years here that are set to go off patent. And once they go off patent, then it does take a little bit of time for the biosimilars to come to market. So we're definitely keeping an eye on a couple of these. you've probably seen commercials for a lot of these when you're sitting at home watching TV. 2028 is going to be a big year. Enbrel, Cosentyx, Keytruda are all, kind of blockbuster specialty medications, really common to see in utilization, at least on Med1's clients. So we're excited about the opportunity there to identify that lowest net cost biosimilar and really garner some of those savings for our clients. All right. I do just want to hit on specialty medications quickly. I do have a quiz question for you here. What percentage of new to market drugs are classified as specialty? So you get a bonus quiz question here in addition to the ones that are being dropped in the chat. What percentage of new to market drugs are classified as specialty? We'll drop it down to a 50-50 here. And your answer is C. 80% of new to market drugs are classified as specialty. So although there's some good things happening on the biosimilar landscape, there's new drugs coming to market every year that are specialty medications, super high cost drugs. I think of the specialty drugs that came to market last year, a really large percentage of them had a price tag of over $200,000. So they're not getting cheaper. And so, health plans, employers need a solution for some of these, very high cost specialty medications. And that's where we get into kind of our next slide here, which is, although there are very high cost, medications constantly coming to market, as well as the ones that are already out there and being utilized, there are solutions, there are opportunities for employers to save on some of these medications. But it really comes down to, employers being with a PBM that will effectively allow them to access some of these programs and solutions, because not every PBM is going to provide access to some of the things that you're seeing on the slide here today. And I will also caveat that not every one of these programs is right for every employer, just based off of their drug mix, based off of their benefit philosophy in general. We at Med1 kind of offer these programs in more of an a la carte fashion, so you can choose one or two or all of them or none of them. It really depends on each specific client and kind of their wants and needs. But if you do have specialty utilization, in your drug mix or in your client's drug mix, I would encourage everyone to at least be familiar with these programs, understand how each of these programs could potentially impact you or your client's drug mix. And then from there, at least you're informed and you can make an educated decision on the pros and cons of potentially pursuing one or some of these programs. But I think it's important that everybody is at least aware that these are out there and can be accessed. I'll tick through some of these quickly. Advanced clinical review on the far left. That's really prior authorization, a dual pharmacist review to ensure specialty medication is appropriate. The most cost-effective options have been tried prior to graduating to the much more expensive specialty drug. We talked a little bit about our biosimilar strategy. The manufacturer and patient assistance programming has been a big one over the past 3 or 4 years. This is drug manufacturers offering programs where patients can essentially, if they qualify, access these patient assistance programs for free off of the benefit. There are some financial requirements associated with these programs, and I would say there's a lot of conversation around whether these programs are drying up essentially or if they're going to go away in the coming years. That question has kind of been on people's minds for the past 4 years when Med1 started looking at some of these programs with our clients. They're like, is this program even going to be around in 1 or 2 years? And here we are 4 years later, kind of asking the same question. So our stance is, as long as they're offered and patients or clients are interested, we will help facilitate kind of that process and taking advantage of some of these programs. We haven't seen any that have like just flat shut down outside of AbbVie that shut down their patient assistance programs back in 2024, right around the time that Humira went off patent and these biosimilars started coming to market. We have seen some that have essentially reduced the financial thresholds of who can essentially enroll in the program. So these are all based on, the federal poverty level. So it's, the financial requirement might be 500 or 600% of the federal poverty level, whether a member can ultimately access and be enrolled in the program. We have seen some programs that have kind of reduced that to say, instead of 500 to 600%, 300 to 400% of the federal poverty level. So they've tightened the screws in certain programs, but I wouldn't say that they've completely gone away. And we still, across our book of business, see approvals, regularly for these programs that our clients have opted to turn on and pursue. So that's the patient assistance programming. International sourcing is another big one that we've identified as an opportunity for savings. We view it as, we're only sourcing these medications from tier 1 countries as designated by the U.S. government, countries with similar FDA type guidelines, similar good manufacturing practices that are required in the United States. So like countries like the UK, Australia, New Zealand, you're probably familiar with a few of these tier 1 countries. And we also make it member opt-in. So even if a client turns on this international sourcing program, at the end of the day, the member has to opt in and say, yes, I want to fill this. We're not requiring it as part of the plan design. But it is, when we can successfully convert a member to international sourcing, depending on the product, we are seeing, 50 to 70% savings off of the cost of what we can, fill it at domestically. I would just encourage anyone who's looking at international sourcing to just make sure you're comparing apples to apples on a net cost basis. So when you're looking at the international price, just ensure that when you're comparing that to the domestic price, you're taking into account, the potential rebate on that specialty medication, as well as any copay assistance available that the member might be able to sign up for as well. Copay assistance, again, that's the manufacturer coupon cards that are available for these specialty medications. I did want to hit on the J-code program real quick. That is a program in which a lot of the high cost, typically infusion medications that are filled on the medical side of the benefit are oftentimes also available through a specialty pharmacy on the pharmacy side of the benefit. And so that program really is a collaborative program with either the medical TPA or the broker and client. But essentially, we try to identify, when there's a super high cost claim on the medical side, if there's an opportunity, if there's savings on the table to transition to that being filled and billed through the pharmacy benefit, and oftentimes, transitioning the member to, say, an in-home infusion setting where they're, a nurse will come out, they'll get that infused, directly in the comfort of their own home. Sometimes they can be set up in an infusion center depending on the medication, but those are a little bit fewer and far between in terms of the opportunities. But when we do identify those and can successfully convert on those products, it's typically a pretty large savings number that's associated with that J-code program. So that's an interesting one, and one that we've seen a lot more interest in over the past, I would say, 2 years or so. Okay, I did want to hit on GLP-1s quickly. I only have one slide on GLP-1s because I think you've probably heard about GLP-1 strategy and kind of what's going on at nauseum at this point. But I would just say, in general, just to give you an idea, so about 90% of Med1's block of business only covers GLP-1s for type 2 diabetes. We do have about 10% of our clients who have turned that on for weight loss as well. But the majority of the time it's covered for type 2 diabetes. And I would just say that not every PBM has the same clinical criteria when it comes to what's required in order for that GLP-1 to be approved on the prior authorization prior to filling it on the benefit. We found that our clinical criteria tends to be a little bit tighter than others that we've seen in the industry. And so on the GLP-1 front, I would just encourage, I would encourage you all to understand how the PBMs that you're working with cover GLP-1s. What's their clinical criteria for approval of the prior authorization? Are they checking to make sure, a max dose of metformin has been tried and failed? Are they checking the patient's A1C to ensure it's over 7 prior to that GLP-1 being filled? just because we typically see, especially when we take over new clients, that some of these things have not been checked in the past. And so it's just important to understand how the PBM is ultimately allowing GLP-1s onto the benefit, even if it's only covered for type 2 diabetes. And then, if it is being covered for weight loss as well, a lot of our weight loss clients that cover it for weight loss are also pairing that with kind of a health coaching setup where patients are checking in with a health coach to ensure that they're also modifying their diet and lifestyle. That way they're not, the goal isn't to be on the GLP-1 forever. The goal is for the GLP-1 to kind of jumpstart that weight loss journey, but then also making kind of those lifestyle changes that you can eventually wean off the GLP-1, and the diet and exercise will kind of take you from there. So that's and there's a lot of different ways to do this with the coverage. I would just say that's kind of the most common approach that we've seen at Med1 for our clients who are interested in covering it for weight loss. Okay, I'll hit on direct to consumer programs just because there's a lot of kind of buzz in the industry right now around these DTC programs, particularly around the GLP-1 category, Lilly Direct, NovoCare. Pfizer has one as well, Pfizer for All. But the way we kind of view it at Med1 is, and I would encourage you all to, again, with the PBMs that you work with, kind of understand their strategy around these direct to consumer programs. But we've kind of seen a similar kind of strategy or program play out over the past few years, with GoodRx and another with Mark Cuban Cost Plus Drugs, where GoodRx was a program that our clients were asking about probably 4 or 5 years ago at this point now, where there would be certain scenarios where the GoodRx price was cheaper than the price that a member could access the drug through insurance. And so they would reach out to HR and they'd say, why is GoodRx cheaper than the insurance? And so rather than kind of putting up a wall, we kind of took the approach of let's wrap our arms around that product and really came up with an integration to integrate with GoodRx. Real-time discount card integration is effectively what it's called, but essentially when a member goes to fill their medication at the pharmacy, they can present their ID card just as they normally would, and when they go to process that claim, it's looking at not only Med1's price but also the GoodRx price, and it's taking the lower of the two prices and still tracking towards the member's deductible and out-of-pocket max. So it's kind of a win-win for the member. It's a win-win for the client because they're not kind of getting those complaints anymore, and it's a win for Med1 because we're not making any money off the cost of the drugs anyway. So we just want the lowest net cost for our clients and members. So the same thing happened with Mark Cuban Cost Plus Drugs when he came to market, and he was truly offering on certain products the lowest price in the industry. That Stargemza example that I gave earlier on the biosimilar, that $400 cost for the biosimilar for Stelara, that's actually the cost at Mark Cuban Cost Plus Drugs. Their pharmacy is the lowest in the industry that you can get that biosimilar product at right now. And so, again, the opportunity presented itself for the PBM like Med1 to go out and integrate with Mark Cuban Cost Plus Drugs and kind of bring them into network and provide access to those prices for our clients and members. So that way, we're not putting up a wall or a barrier or saying to our clients and members, you have to fill through our own specialty or mail order pharmacy. No, if there's a better price out there, we want to provide access to that better price for our clients and members. And so that's kind of the same conversations that are happening with these direct to consumer programs, because there are some that are coming out that are truly cheaper via the cash pay price to fill it through some of these direct to consumer programs than it is to fill it with the insurance. And so that's kind of some of the things we're thinking through right now. We don't have a fully baked solution, but I would encourage you to understand how your PBM is kind of viewing some of these direct to consumer programs, and if they're working towards providing access to this true lowest net costs price, because that's ultimately what we want our members and clients to have access to. Is if there's a better price out there, let's go get it. I mentioned the Mark Cuban Cost Plus integration, so I'll kind of skip over this one for now, but this is just an actual real world example of Mark Cuban Cost Plus Drug Company, where there was a specialty medication for Sprycel, that, expensive uh, specialty medication treats chronic myeloid leukemia, so cancer medication, it can be $100,000 a year. And the generic comes to market. It's available for Mark Cuban cost plus drugs, now for $4,000 to $7,000 per year, depending on the dosage. And so again, we've kind of identified Cuban's pharmacy as the lowest net cost product for this medication. So if we see this drug pop up on one of our clients' utilization, and we'll see it pop up because it's a specialty medication, so we see it when the prior authorization is initiated. Once the PA is approved, we're directing the fill to Cuban's pharmacy because that's going to be the most cost-effective option for both our client and the member. And if the member has an out-of-pocket expense, with that, that's still tracking to the deductible and out-of-pocket max. So it truly operates like an in-network mail order pharmacy. But we want to provide that price to our clients and not force them to fill it at a higher price through Med1's pharmacy or another pharmacy like that. Okay, so that's a little bit about direct to consumer. Just to summarize here, the 5 key trends that we're kind of keeping an eye out for in 2026 here is really the ones you see on the screen. The first is that there's no silver bullet. There's no one size fits all for a client. I would encourage brokers and clients to be with a PBM if you can, that allows you to understand your own drug mix, provides you data on your own drug mix, so you can make informed decisions about what programs might be impactful for your specific mix of drugs, and then allowing you the flexibility and access and customizability for your own plan to make those decisions or turn on those programs that make sense for that specific client. So it's not, there's going to be different programs that make more sense than others for each client. That's kind of that no one size fits all mantra. It rings true more than ever, I would say, in PBM and prescription benefits. GLP-1 strategy, obviously there's going to be a rise in demands. They're here to stay. Again, I would just encourage, whether you're covering it for only type 2 diabetes or type 2 diabetes plus weight loss, I would just encourage you to have a good understanding of the parameters in which the clinical criteria has been set to allow access to those medications, and truly what's being checked during that PA process prior to the drug just being on the benefit and the client being stuck with that high price tag, making sure there's some checks and balances in place prior to that happening. Biosimilars, again, this is a really exciting opportunity, we feel, for clients, health plans, self-funded employers, to still provide access to these medically necessary treatments for these high touch specialty utilized members, but doing it in a way that's not going to seriously impact the financials of the health plan, being able to kind of transition to these much more cost-effective products while still providing access to the treatment that members need is really, we feel, an all-around win-win. Direct to consumer, we just talked about, and then flexibility. I would just say, now more so than ever, with the legislation that we're seeing around, PBMs being required to kind of, in certain cases, kind of a total upheaval of the way their financial model operates today. So it's PBMs are being asked to make changes, be more flexible, be more nimble, provide more data to clients and brokers. And so again, being with a PBM who has that kind of proven flexibility, I think is not only important now, but will continue to be important as we kind of work through this ever-changing, shifting PBM landscape in 2026 and beyond. All right, and that's my last slide. Okay, so I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have. I can certainly provide these slides to Allison or Michelle, and we can go from there. But I just thank you again for joining me here today, allowing me the opportunity to share a little bit about what we're seeing in the PBM landscape, from Med1's perspective, and thank you all for joining and being interested in the opportunities that are available to the clients that we serve.
Hey, John. Thank you so much. This is such a great topic and so timely with all of the changes going on with drugs and all of the just everything going on right now. So we really appreciate you coming in and sharing this. It does look like we have a question from Lacey. Does lifestyle changes partnered with GLP-1 require a wellness plan to be implemented, or can it be built as a plan provision without concern?
Yeah, it's definitely not a requirement. If a client wants to cover the GLP-1s for, type 2 diabetes or weight loss, it's not, it's definitely not required for a plan to also turn on kind of the wellness coaching program. We've just found that it gives clients a little bit more peace of mind that if they're going to be paying these higher cost products, GLP-1s, particularly for weight loss, that the member just isn't only requiring or isn't only leaning on the GLP-1 medication to be their kind of only thing that they're doing in an attempt to lose weight effectively. And so some of our clients have built in strategies where like they require, so not only is the coaching program there, but they require the member to engage with the coaching program in order to provide continued access to the GLP-1s. So again, there's different ways that it can be done, and there's options available to clients if you're with a PBM that kind of allows those options. But it is not a requirement to have the coaching in place if it just, you want to cover for type 2 diabetes and weight loss, and don't want to require the coaching. That is certainly an option.
It looks like Lacey followed up, but is the wellness coaching piece a wellness plan subject to GINA or GINA or a plan provision?
It would be a plan provision. At least speaking for Med1, it would be a plan provision in our kind of plan build form. It would be kind of baked into the pharmacy benefit plan at that point. So, we would have reporting back to you within the kind of the Med1 pharmacy benefit reporting that speaks to the wellness coaching and kind of reporting specifically on that front. So it would all kind of be baked into the pharmacy benefit still.
Awesome. That looks like the clarification that Lacey needed. So thank you. We'll give everyone a couple more seconds if you have any other questions for John today. And I hope everyone got their poll questions answered. I know it looked like some people missed it, so we did run that first one a second time. All right. Similar to our first one, John, there aren't any more questions, just glowing reviews for you. So if you were feeling bad about yourself this morning, go ahead and read the comments in the chat bot and you'll instantly feel better.
That's
Okay.
awesome. Thanks, Allison. Thank you, everybody, for the time, and hope everyone has a great day.